make cabinet bodies, the first step is to cut out all the components out of whatever material it is that you're using. It's pretty easy to do if you're just working with plywood. All you have to do is cut things down to size. It's almost as easy if you're using nice, solid hardwood. You just have to glue together some oversized panels, then trim them to their final dimensions. In my case, I wanted to use solid black walnut, but I didn't have enough on hand to account for all the different parts. Those being the cabinet bodies and eventually the face frames and door and drawer faces. So to make up for this, I used plywood in any place that couldn't be seen from the outside. Then I glued walnut panels together for the show faces. And if that wasn't complicated enough, I still had to use several undesirable pieces of walnut just to get the job done. So I had to spend quite a bit of time strategizing just where I could use these boards so the ugly side didn't show. In most cases, the boards had one good flat side, so I could just turn the uneven faces to the inside of the cabinet and hide them from view. In the case of my tallest cabinet, even that wasn't going to work, so I oriented all the worst parts of the boards toward the bottom, knowing that they would be hidden by the next cabinet pushing up against them. Once I worked out where each individual board was going to go to make the best use of my material, I made a series of marks, then added some dowels to help with the alignment during the glue up. These are long, edge grain joints, so the dowels don't have much to do with added strength. Their job is more to keep the faces flush with each other, so I don't have to remove a bunch of material flattening them back out after the fact, which would result in a material that's thinner than the plywood I'm trying to pair it with. I sent the walnut panels through my drum sander a few times just to cut down on the hand sanding, then I switched to my orbital sander to finish it up. It's much easier to sand stuff now as panels than it is once everything is assembled, at least the insides are anyway. This, by the way, is my new SurfPrep sander. I just started working with them and I'm a huge fan. There's a link in the description that'll take you to all the cool sanders and abrasives that they make, and if you see something you like, use the code Gunflint10 to save yourself some money. I used my table saw and a circular saw with a straight edge guide to get the panels down to their final dimensions. Then the last cut I need to make is a thin dado that'll capture the 1/4 inch material I'm using for the back panel. I set my table saw blade height to half the thickness of the material and moved my fence over to exactly the same thickness as my material. I ran a scrap piece over the blade to make sure everything was set up right, then I ran all of my pieces through, paying close attention to their orientation so I didn't cut into the wrong place. Then I bumped the fence over just a little and tested to make sure it would fit my 1/4 inch material. Then I ran all the pieces through one more time. The tall cabinet sides were a little cumbersome, and I used a roller stand as an infeed support. You can actually see here that my panel cupped a little, but that will get pulled square again during assembly, so right now I'm just focused on that back corner being flat so the dado gets cut uniformly down the entire length. With the pieces all cut out, I test fit them all together to make sure everything is correct before I move on to the joinery, which will be pocket holes. Say what you will about pocket holes, but they are easy to use and the resulting joint is plenty strong enough for cabinets like these. I marked out the spacing for my holes on a scrap piece, then used a straight edge to transfer those lines to all the top and bottom pieces. This is handy because one side will ultimately be facing the floor and one side will be covered by the bench top, so there's no need to plug the holes or clean up the faces in any way. The uniformity certainly doesn't matter since you won't see it, but it does make me feel good. The only thing that really matters is not running right through the dado for the back panel. I set up my jig, then drilled out all the pocket holes before moving on to assembly. With some assembly squares clamped to the first side, I put glue on the bottom panel and clamp it in place, then I run in all the screws and clean up the glue squeeze out. I repeat the process on the other end, then I slide the back panel into the groove, throw some glue on the ends, and set the opposite side on top. I clamp this side in place starting at one front-facing corner, then run screws in as I work my way to the back, keeping the edges flush. The tall cabinet was slightly more complicated because there's a partition in the middle. Ultimately, this cabinet will have hinged doors at the top and bottom with 4 drawers in between them. This middle piece becomes the floor of the top cabinet and helps add strength to the body since it's extra tall and skinny. To glue in the middle section, I used some scrap plywood as a spacer and pinched it in between the top and middle to make a solid reference point. Then once again I clamped the piece down and add the screws. I also took this opportunity to add shelf pin holes in the top and bottom compartments since it'll be much harder to access once the body is all closed up. Just like with the smaller cabinets, I slid the back panels in place. In this case, I didn't have a single piece of material long enough for the full height, so I used 2 smaller pieces and made sure that the seam landed behind the drawer section so it wouldn't be seen later. After adding glue, I set the side on top, then used clamps and screws to lock everything together. Fastening the middle piece was a little trickier this time due to the limited space, but the technique was the same. Oh, and the confined space really amplified the noise from the impact driver. I really should have had earplugs in for that one. In order to secure these cabinets to the studs in the walls come installation time, they need something a little more solid to screw through. That's why the dado for the back starts exactly one material thickness away from the back edge. So I threw on some glue and screwed 3 of these spacer blocks in the top, middle, and bottom of the back. Now you might be wondering why I didn't build these with toe kicks, and there's a few reasons for that. Primarily, the way this bench is going to be used, toe kicks just aren't necessary. Secondly, if you've been following along, you know that my basement has had an issue with water in the past. So rather than having cabinets that sit flat on the floor, I wanted to build feet that would keep the important stuff up off the ground in case the basement had a flood. With these feet set in from the edges a bit, I will come back with trim to hide them after installation, and will effectively create that toe kick space without having to worry about building them into the design. So obviously there's lots of different ways you can make cabinet bodies. It's just a hollow box. It's not that complicated. This just happens to be the fastest and easiest way that I've found to do something like this. If you weren't aware, this is the end result. This is part of what I'm calling the Man Cave project. If you haven't seen this project until now, I've got links so you can go see the couple of videos that are out already. I have a planning stage video and I have an overview of the finished product video, which is, you can see behind me. So now I'm going to be releasing the how-to portion of this series, which I'm trying to do in smaller sort of bite-sized chunks. So obviously this was the cabinet bodies video. Next I'm going to do a face frames video. Then I'll do a door and drawer faces video, a drawer bodies and hardware installation video, workbench top video, and then we'll move on to the other parts of this entire room and their projects. So check all the links in the description. That'll take you to all the videos as they come out, and it'll take you to all the tools and components and stuff that you might want for yourself if you're going to start building something like this too. So anyway, thanks for checking this out. Come back soon. I'll have the next video out before too long. And that is about it. Thanks, guys.